It's February 15th, 2023, and I'm behind the counter of the pharmacy at Walgreens doing all the hard work that needs to take place before we ever get one of these to you. And I was starting to feel extremely awkward, jittery, dizzy, like I'd never ever felt before. It scared me. I realized that it was because I felt trapped between Walgreens' promise of a sign-on bonus a year ago and nobody's ability to deliver it. I just felt trapped, and my boss tells me, one time too many. We still are trying to figure out who to contact to fix this. I get in my car and I'm driving as angry as can be home. I don't remember much except that I thought it was odd that I had to remember to breathe, that most people don't have to stop and think it's time to breathe. So I drove home, I got into my place, and I became somebody I've never been. I became so full of rage. I turned over furniture, I broke things, screaming. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and then finally I knew I was dying because I could not breathe. I fall to the floor, all alone, except my grandmother's quilt that she made for me was just nearby. I grabbed it and pulled it over me, knowing I was dying, but glad that there was some semblance of family with me while I was dying. 2 weeks later, I woke up in the public parking garage up in Old Town Park City with no memory of how I got from my Walgreens, get this, Minneapolis, Minnesota is where I was working. I wake up in the parking garage in Park City with no memory of how I got there. 1,200 miles, Minnesota to Utah, Minneapolis to Park City. Baffled, frightened, bewildered, there is not a word to describe how I felt. And I'm racking my brain. Is this a prank? I have some pretty raucous friends, but no, they're not that creative. Am I on a reality show? Maybe that's it. They knocked me out, but no. I was kidnapped. No, I'm worthless. Nobody would want to kidnap me. Did I bump my head? No. I became frantic with no explanation of what happened. How am I in a totally different place with no memory? I ended up in the emergency room at Park City Intermountain Hospital. And they kept me there in the emergency room for 5 days across from the nurses' station so they can observe and help me. It was wonderful. And it was during those 5 days that memories started to come back. Not of those 2 weeks I missed and not about the drive, but, oh yes, okay, so I have a life. I am a single father and I have 4 amazing kids. Andrew is an F-35 pilot for the Navy. My daughter, Mary Claire, yes, she is a nurse at Stanford Medical Center. My son, Alex, yes, he's a hippie living on a renovated school bus in Buena Vista, California, having a great time, Buena Vista, Colorado, having a great time. And my youngest, Emma Kate, is a traveling trauma nurse that takes over for people who need a break in hospitals around the country. It was a relief to start putting my life back together after all of what I went through waking up in Park City. And then as I'm laying there, tears, warm tears, were going down the side of my face as I remembered this beautiful life with my kids. We were the house where people gathered. We had everything you needed for a holiday, to serve 20 people, formal dinner, casual dinner, just great decor. And I had carefully curated all that, packed in boxes, and listed, organized perfectly. And it was a huge comfort and relief to me that I knew back in Minnesota, in my place, the beautiful life that I had was packed up and there for me, like a real comforting protection. Pretty soon, day 5, it went by pretty fast. I wake up and there are like doctors filling the room, different people. And in different ways, they all told me, Dan, you have been in a fugue state, F-U-G-U-E. I didn't hear or understand anything else that they said about it, except that they were going to send me to Salt Lake to a place called Recovery Ways, because the clinician there, the clinical director, was a specialist in dissociation. Fugue is a dissociative state up high, just below catatonic, where you just would be locked up. And your body go into a reptilian brain mode, and your autonomic nervous system starts to shut down. Short memory turns off, but you go about your business. And that's what happened to me. So Camille is an expert in that. And she says in our first meeting, first sentence, Dan, you have PTSD. I said, no, I'm sorry, you got it wrong. I'm not a soldier, and I'm not a first responder, so let's come up with something else. She said, no, different trauma can give you PTSD. Even stress upon stress upon stress upon stress that's undealt with can give you PTSD. Well, she went digging. It turns out there was a lot of trauma in my life. The first memory I have of it was I was a kid and the orthodontist was upset about baby teeth that weren't coming out. He sent me to a dentist that looked like Popeye, but had a worse bedside manner. And this dentist, in a chair just for adults, there wasn't pediatric dentistry back then, scared to death. And this dentist numbs me up and starts pulling out these 4 baby teeth. I thought they just wiggle out like the other ones did, but they didn't. And he had to yank and yank, and I felt it. Nobody in the room believed me. I said, I am feeling this. It was a messy, horrific, bloody torture. Recently, my mom reminded me that I didn't speak for a week after the procedure, and when I started speaking, I stuttered for 2 months. Around that time, my teacher at Joshua Circle Elementary School started holding me back from recess, and he would trap me in the classroom bathroom and do things with me that I won't discuss here, but I will tell you. I felt so trapped. And not a physical claustrophobic trapped, but with a secret I couldn't tell anybody. That and other things made school, the rest of elementary school, middle school, high school, really hard. I couldn't throw a ball or catch a ball, so I was bullied so much that I learned to live up back here, dissociated from myself, looking behind me, around me, and at me, and around corners to avoid being pushed into the lockers, spat upon, my books kicked out of my hands, whatever have you, how I was bullied. The name calling was the worst. College was a respite. I loved college. It was great. But soon after graduation and starting work, I got news that my dad was diagnosed at 49 years old with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and I was crushed. I moved my family back home to my hometown to be one of his caregivers, and it came time for him to be put on a portable ventilator or to go. We chose portable ventilator, respirator, and I'll never forget him looking at me and saying, son, you must promise me that when it's time, you will take me off of this. Pretty heavy duty. 15 months later, in the hospital bed in our living room, he got pneumonia without the ability to cough or do anything. And I knew it was time. So I looked at him and I said, Dad, blink once if you want to fight this, blink twice if it's time to go. And he blinked twice. The nurse came in and gave him sedatives, and after 15 minutes of that, his heartbeat went down to 30 beats a minute, and we turned off the machine and watched him for 2 minutes and 13 seconds suffocate to death in front of us. Camille was right. I had some trauma in my life. Not too long after that, at Kennedy Space Center in Florida, I was standing on the landing strip with Evelyn, Matthew, and Laura, the family of my good friend Rick Husband, who was the commander of STS-107 Columbia Space Shuttle. And we're so excited. I hadn't been to a landing, I'd been to launches, but the clock is counting down and waiting for the sonic boom, and we're just all so happy. And right there between his family, the clock went down to 0. There was no sonic boom, and the clock started counting up. And we all knew something was up. We were all looking at each other, and then officials from NASA came and grabbed us from this little group of 50 in a special family area, took us to another room where we learned that Rick and his crew were in the shuttle when it exploded over Texas. And then update after update, maybe their parachutes worked. But then finally, no one survived. I went through the next 2 weeks with Rick's family, helping them go through their 3 different funerals in 3 different special places for their family. I remember Matthew looking up at me and combing his hair and saying, "I want to look good for Daddy. Do I look good?" It was traumatic. Then came divorce, which was comprehensively devastating. My wife left me for her sweetheart from high school and had, I found out later, been having an affair with him our entire marriage. And that explained why she was so emotionally unavailable, and she just didn't love me. This caused, the vitriol of it caused my children to just not want to participate in a relationship with either of us. It was too hard. There was distance there then. The last thing Camille said is she leaned in and she said, "You also have compassion fatigue." And I'm like, "What's that?" And it turned out that Matthew, 6'3", behind me in church one Sunday, that I turned around, he's 22, and the pastor says, "Turn around and greet each other." I turned to him, 6'3", I go to shake his hand, and like I do with most young men, I put my hand on the shoulder. I was going to say, "Good to meet you," and he fell down and then ran out of the church. I followed him to what became an 8-hour conversation, and my inability to put him back on the streets. He's autistic and homeless. So I take him in, and 10 years go by, and finally he's independent, living in his own place, but 10 years of taking care of autistic Matthew while working full-time at Walgreens led to compassion fatigue. So I said, "Okay, Camille, I get it." 60 days ended, and it was like, if it was physical, it would be like somebody opening up your thoracic cavity, taking out each important organ and stomping on it and putting it back in. But emotionally, psychologically, mentally. I leave the place, I go back to work at Walgreens, and I stay in Utah because I had intensive outpatient therapy to go to. And I'm working Park City Walgreens, and I realize, what about my stuff in Minnesota? What about my home? What about all my carefully curated stuff in boxes? 2 full bedrooms worth of boxes. I was nothing short of a hoarder. I had to realize that I'd spent tens of thousands of dollars on storage or bigger places to live to accommodate this. I was a hoarder. Those boxes, it used to mean so much to me, my attachment to the previous life that I was going to bring back to life someday and have that beautiful life, became boxes of empty hope. So I contacted 2 nonprofits. I had them come and take everything that I've ever hoarded, everything in my apartment, and then I moved into my 17-year-old Honda Odyssey van, and everything I own fits in it. It's a totally different life. I am free of the burden of the hoard. And that allows me now to take steps into my future life. And I'm so excited. As a man of Christian faith, I believe that God sets our steps ahead of us to simply walk through. And I believe that. And with the help of my friends at Mountain Life Church, where they just give me grace, they don't let me sink into shame, they accept me. And Summit County Clubhouse, a place for people with mental health challenges, unable to be anything but alone. Because alone in isolation is when the itty bitty shitty committee takes over. And it starts telling you all the things you did wrong and how worthless you are. So I have that place to go. I can't go on this journey alone, but I have people with me. I'm taking those steps, and I know a couple of those steps involve reconciliation with my children.